Welcome to another episode of the How to Fight with a Longsword series, or in other words, the Lichtenauer Tradition Longsword Fencing Basic course. In this episode, we'll be talking about sparring. If you are following this series as a basic course, the last two lessons are reserved for sparring. Now, before we start with the actual subject of this episode, please do note that the incorrect examples are exaggerated on purpose so that the issues are easier to see. All of the techniques based on the historical sources are shown according to my current interpretations. As such, they are subject to change if I ever come up with or run into a better interpretation. Let's start with some definitions I use. Once again, these are not in any way universal terms, but they are the ones I use. People use the terms free play and sparring in many ways. For some people they mean different things. For some they are the same. Some only use one term and so on. For me there is a difference. Free play is a lower intensity minimal gear training style. Basically what you are seeing right now. Sparring is a higher intensity full gear training style. Let's start by taking a look at free play, as it is possible with the minimum required gear for the basic course. I'll then talk about sparring a bit later. Free play is possible to do without any other gear than a sword. However, I do not recommend this unless you are an experienced fencer and you know your partner well. In this case, use extreme caution and never land a hit. Even if it is safe to land a hit on a larger muscle, a hit to the head can easily cause an injury. Thus, it is safer to never land a hit. Generally, I would recommend that you wear a mask and gloves. Gloves are there to protect from accidental hits, not as a target. Because of the limited gear, the allowed targets are also limited. I would highly recommend that you do not use thrusts. The risk of accidentally hitting something not protected with a thrust because of a parry or such is too high. Never trust to an unprotected target. In the most limited version, only the mask is an allowed target. I would generally also allow the large thigh muscles and the upper arm and shoulders. This naturally means that the intensity must be kept low. I have also done free play so that everything above the knee and the elbow is an allowed target. I don't recommend that you allow the torso as a target before you are a more experienced fencer. The intensity should be kept low, somewhere around the 30% mark for both fencers. In general, the intensity must be such that you are able to stop the sword at any moment. Also, every hit which lands must be controlled and light. In my experience, a mask and gloves, no thrusting and limiting targets to the head, upper arms and thighs, and strict adherence to very low intensity makes this style of training safe even for relative beginners. I have done this multiple times in a class with relatively new fencers and I have never had a single accident. Years ago at EHMS, when we didn't have as much loaner gear as we do now, we did this quite often. What I have had is accidents with people of similar skill level in full sparring gear. I believe that this is because people think that protective equipment makes them invulnerable. This is not the case. In other aspects, free play is just the same as sparring, so I will talk about how to use it as a training method when we get to sparring. Before we get to sparring, let's go through what a full sparring kit includes. Starting from the bottom, you should wear some kind of a sports shoe. These simply protect your feet in case someone steps on your toes or something similar. Next you want to have shin and knee protectors. You can either have separate pieces as shown here or a combined knee and shin protector. Motocross protectors work pretty well as an inexpensive option. Then pants. Some people like to wear fencing pants, some don't. Some competitions require neutral-rated pants, some don't. I would say that this is up to you, but there is not much reason for not wearing fencing pants other than cost. Then a cup. Men, do not fence without a groin protector. For men this is mandatory. Women can choose for themselves. Every single competition I know requires men to wear one. Some competitions require women to wear one, some don't. Some people like to wear a chest protector under their jacket. Some competitions also require one. I personally didn't wear a chest protector under my previous thicker jacket, but I do under the current thinner one. This is totally up to you unless you want to compete. In that case, you just need to check the rules. Something you must have under your jacket is a throat protector. Any rigid throat protector will do in my experience. See the intro episode for some recommendations. There is a wide variety of jackets available. The most common ones, at least where I live, are the Spes AP jacket and the Spes Light AP jacket. The latter one has been getting more and more popular. One thing about the jacket is that unless you happen to fit the standard sizes very well, this is the one piece of gear I recommend that you get in a custom size. Over the jacket you must wear some kind of an elbow protector. Once again, motocross protectors are a cheap and easily available option. Depending on your jacket, gloves and general preferences, you also might want to have forearm protectors. Gloves are a must for sparring. Check the intro video for some recommendations. Finally, the mask. Once again, check the intro video. I highly recommend that you use a back of the head protector with your mask. It doesn't really matter if it's integral to the mask or a separate piece, just have one. The intro video has more details on some of these, so check that out for more information. In general, if you want to make things easy for yourself, Spes sells pretty much all of this. The quality of the equipment is also high, so I can recommend them. Then shortly the list of illegal targets. You are not allowed to attack the following targets as it can lead to a serious injury. Feet, groin, Achilles tendons, back of the knee, spine or the back in general, back of the head. Then let's talk about why we want to spar in the first place. The very short answer is that to learn the fence you need to spar. Do note that I didn't say that to do HEMA you need to spar. You can still have fun learning fencing techniques without sparring, or you can only concentrate on cutting with sharp swords. And the list just goes on. But if you want to learn the fence, you have to spar. The idea of sparring is to be able to test out the techniques you learn when drilling in a situation which simulates actual fighting with swords. Naturally, using blunt swords to fight wearing protective equipment will never be the same as fighting with sharps. It also doesn't need to be, as that is not the goal. What sparring needs to do is to create an environment in which your opponent doesn't want to get hit and tries to hit you. The other important thing is that this is done without limitations. I'm now specifically talking about limitations in terms of how to hit and not to get hit. There are, and should be, limitations based on safety, the equipment used, and so on. What I mean with this is that there must be limitations on allowed targets so no one gets hurt. There should be limitations on the allowed intensity. Some techniques, such as joint breaks, should not be used to prevent injuries and so on. Other than that, everything else should be allowed. The idea behind this is that now both fencers have to react to such a wide variety of possibilities that you can't just prepare for certain actions. You have to actively assess the situation and make decisions on the fly. As the amount of possibilities is so large, reading the situation is naturally much more difficult when compared to a limited drilling situation. A form of limited sparring can be a very useful tool to train specific things, but I see that as a separate form of training. For example, limiting the target to head only, or only counting hits landed using one of the Meisterhau can be a useful learning tool. They are a form of a drill which is very close to sparring. This also extends to not limiting the goals of the fencing to a rule system. If you spar according to a rule system, in the long term you don't learn to fence in general, you learn to fence only in the context of that system. The big issue with this is that almost inevitably this leads to gaming the rules. And by saying gaming the rules, I don't mean intentionally gaming the rules. It is almost inevitable that this will happen at an unconscious level. If any touch with the sword counts, why would you use proper edge alignment and cut with proper arc? If only the first to attack can score, why would anyone use counterattacks? If specified targets are of higher value, you can trade hits and still win. The list just goes on. Naturally, if your goal is to simply be the best possible fencer you can be in the area where that specific rule system is used, then by all means train to that rule system. However, do understand that pretty much inevitably this will cause artifacts in your fencing style. This is also why I don't fence thinking of the so-called Nordic rules when sparring, even though I think the rule set is pretty good. My guidelines for sparring are the following. 1. Don't get hit. 2. Land an effective attack on your opponent or otherwise make them unable to continue. For example, disarm them. That's it. You can call them rules if you wish. I just call this learning to use a weapon. Shortly, I try to land attacks which would be effective with a sharp sword. Still, my ultimate goal is to not get hit. If I land an attack but get hit, I have failed at my goal in the context of being effective with my techniques. From this we get to the actual goal of sparring. It is to learn. More specifically, both fencers in a sparring situation should be able to learn from it. To get more into this, first we need to make a difference between winning and learning. You are not trying to win a sparring match. You are trying to learn. What you are specifically trying to learn is up to you. The guidelines I just explained are not for winning. They are for determining the effectiveness of my techniques. Thus I can use it to monitor my learning. But back to winning and learning. Here is an example. I know that against a specific fencer I can pretty much every time land a specific attack and not get hit. We spar for 2 minutes and for the whole match that single attack is the only thing I do. I hit my sparring partner 12 times during that time with proper attacks and never got hit. It would be safe to say that I am winning. However, it is very likely that I am not learning. I'm simply doing something that I can already do again and again and again. Clearly, I'm also not doing it in a difficult enough situation as I'm able to do it in sparring on average every 10 seconds without getting hit even once. It can also be said that most likely my sparring partner is not learning. The situation is clearly too difficult for them, or they do not understand what is happening. For them to learn effectively, it would be a good idea to turn the situation into a drill so that they can learn how to handle it. Then, after they can do it in a limited drill, it can be brought back to a sparring situation. In this situation, I should change what I am doing. I should try different techniques. If the case is such that my sparring partner is in general much more inexperienced, I should find a way to make the situation more difficult for me. I could try techniques I'm not good at. I could try to set up specific situations by feeding false information to my partner. The list goes on. The important thing is that I should make changes to my fencing so that I can still learn something from the sparring match. The bigger the skill difference, the more difficult things the more skilled fencer can generally speaking try to learn. As the more skilled fencer, it is also up to me to make the sparring situation such that the more inexperienced fencer can still learn from it. In the case that there is no great skill difference, I should change what I am doing after a couple of successes. Clearly it works, and after repeating the same technique a couple of times, there is not much more I can get out of the situation. At this point, it is time to try something else to maximize my learning. When it comes to learning, remember to not limit yourself to techniques. For example, you can try to learn reading the distance to your opponent, or you can learn to separate feints from proper attacks. The list goes on, but the point is not to get stuck on techniques. Those are only very basic building blocks for effective fencing. Before we get to how to spar, just a short comment on other types of sparring. As already mentioned, limited sparring can be extremely useful. But as said, I see it as a drill of sorts which is just brought closer to sparring. I also see competition prep as a specific style of a drill. When prepping for a competition, it can be a good idea to spar to win according to a rule set. This can teach you how to deal with that specific rule system, especially if it is a very limiting one. A good example might be a system which doesn't allow trusting. If your personal fencing style is very trust centric, it might be a good idea to fence according to the rules a bit. However, this is in no way necessary. It works for some people and not for others. The best fencers I know are good fencers in general. They don't train to a rule system. A good fencer can fence well under any even remotely sensible system. Then we finally get to how to spar. I will shortly go through the best practices when it comes to a sparring round in general and then talk more about the other aspects of sparring. Before starting to fence, both fencers should be clearly outside distance with all gear on. At this point, you should also check your partner's gear. If you notice that their jacket is open, one of the elbow protectors has fallen off, or something similar, tell them. It is easy to miss something like a partially open jacket zipper. Before starting to fence, both fencers salute. This can be done, for example, by bringing the crossguard in front of your face. This is an indication that you are ready to fence. Do not start fencing before your partner has saluted. It is completely possible that your partner is standing in a guard but has zoned out or has been distracted by something. Thus, wait for the salute. Also, after you have saluted, your concentration should be on the sparring bout and not something else. After that, you freely fence until one of the fencers gets hit. It is common to have a so-called afterblow tempo, which allows the fencing to continue for half a second or so after the first hit. The idea is to give enough time for an immediate attack after the hit, so that the fencer who landed the hit must still keep protecting themselves. After that, clearly break the distance before continuing to fence. In sparring, it is often a good idea to indicate where you were hit after an exchange. It can be a valuable learning tool, and sometimes it is difficult to actually notice that you landed a hit. A hit through a poor parry can often look like a failed cut to the attacker. Also understand that when fencing, it is completely possible that you don't notice that you got hit. Then simply repeat this for the remainder of the sparring match. I would generally recommend that sparring matches last from 1.5 minutes up to 3 minutes. After the sparring match, it is generally a good idea to have a short feedback session with your partner. This can be just a few sentences about your observations. You can also ask questions. This can be extremely useful when a more experienced fencer is sparring with a beginner. They can give them feedback on what worked and what did not, and how to possibly fix things. The intensity of sparring must be such that it fits both fencers. If one fencer thinks that the intensity is too high, it is too high. In such a case, the fencer must say that they think that the intensity is too high, and the other fencer must lower the intensity. This can be intensity in the sense of hitting too hard, or just fencing too fast in general. It can naturally be both. What is too high intensity can also differ drastically from person to person, so keep that in mind. Then to how often should you spar and when to start? In my opinion, as often as possible and as soon as possible. If you have followed this basic course, the 8th and the last week of the basic course is purely sparring. As such, the 15th class is the first sparring session for those following this basic course. At EHMS, where I train and teach, we spar during every single training session. The 90-minute class is split up so that the first hour is warming up and drills. The last 30 minutes is sparring and the 5-minute feedback session for the class. These are not exact times, but generally speaking, the sparring time per class is somewhere between 20 to 35 minutes. I can't remember the last time there was a class I attended during which we didn't spar. Then to the how to learn part of how to spar. Very shortly, when you go to spar, you should have a generic idea about what you are aiming to learn. It can be something very simple, such as I aim to take initiative in fencing, or it can be something like trying to land a specific technique. Especially in the beginning, I recommend that you concentrate on something at the very basics of fencing. Such a thing might be the previously mentioned initiative. In this case, plan 2 or 3 opening attacks which you can use. A very simple way is to just use the Meisterhau. For beginners, a common second problem is that after you can take the initiative, you freeze up after the first attack. Then start planning a couple of options which are 2 steps long. Basically, you plan for a Vorschlag and an Umschlag. This way you can slowly start to build up your list of techniques you can use in a sparring situation. I also mentioned the short feedback session after a sparring match. If you get to spar with a more experienced fencer and they give you feedback, it can be a good idea to ask for tips on what to do. You can then use this in the following sparring rounds as your learning plan.